Hi, humans. We are just going to get started. Happy post-Thanksgiving, I guess. I I really enjoyed my day off yesterday. I didn't even watch movies the way I normally do. I took lots of naps and made food and got a little bit of productive stuff done. It was a lovely day. Today, I got up and got some work done, and then I took the dog for a walk, and I got a burrito. And I saw the elephants at the zoo, which you can see them on the Bosque Trail if you're by Tingley Beach. Anyway, it was a gorgeous afternoon. And so I had time and energy to go ahead and record a podcast. It was an interesting day. So, not an interesting day, an interesting week. So there was a woman, and I can't even remember the username, but she had posted a ranting video about the road goes both ways, or the phone goes both ways. And she was talking about her parent and feeling really frustrated that her parent felt entitled to a phone call or communication. And so I responded, as did several hundred people who were like, that's bullshit, right? I didn't say that part. I was just like, it's interesting because what she had said specifically was that the adult, whoever the adult is, has the power to, is the powerful one in that dynamic. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's a millennial. She has new babies. She's relatively new to the world and figuring things out. And I didn't want to come for her, but I was like, that's not real. But it made me start thinking about this idea of the road goes both ways, or the phone goes both ways. Effort goes both ways. That's what goes both ways. And my mom used to say that the road goes both ways, and she was referring to my godparents, who lived about 20 miles away from her, because she used to go down there often and like see them and hang out with them. And then at some point she just stopped going, which I understand, right? The road does in fact go both ways. But I also understand who my mother is, and she is a Cancer. She needs to be invited. She needs to be engaged with. She needs that kind of attention. And I don't know if, astrology is your thing, but it is something to pay attention to when you think about someone like that who needs that kind of validation consistently. So I know that about my mother. And, I make an effort because that's something I want to do. But I do recognize that that is her perspective of the phone goes both ways, the road goes both ways. She will go years without talking to someone if they don't make the effort. Which I can understand, right? I do have an awareness that that is a perspective. It's not my perspective. As a Pisces, I'm always reaching out and I'm always like, hey, how's it going? Hey, just thinking about you. Hey, blah. But I do eventually stop, right? Matching energy is a thing that I don't put more into anything that people aren't also putting into. I posted something just a minute ago on my story that talked about our job as therapists is to fix people, and it's not, right? It's to give them the tools to be able to make their life easier or better. It's to be able to hold space and to give them and help them feel seen, right? In their most authentic way, right? It's not, I don't have the building blocks or skills or tools to be able to fix anyone. And I've never touted that I did. But I find it interesting. So back to this post. She got a lot of response. And I'm not sure if it was rage bait. I'm not sure if she's just, kind of naive or isn't sure what she's talking about. I don't know. I did look at a little bit more of her content. And it was interesting because she puts her whole life online, and I'm not judging that. That's how people do it. Some people. I'm very selective on the authenticity that I put online, but I'm older and I don't feel the need to share my every moment, which is why I've stepped back from posting pretty consistently. When I was on my trip, it was a lot easier because I was by myself. But now at the end of like a long work day or work week, I don't have the capacity to just like make videos. So I started thinking about this idea, right? Of like, what are we entitled to? Well, none of us are entitled to anything, actually. Food, shelter, clothing from a parenting perspective is the bare minimum, but it is what we are required by the state to provide for a little. Most people who choose very lovingly to have a baby, at any point that they chose, want to put in the effort of making sure that that child has a stable and secure environment to be able to grow and explore and develop and all the things. But they're not entitled to anything. Like, we want to give them all of those things, right? As adult children, we are not entitled to anything. And so I had put that on my second post to her. I was like, unfortunately, nobody's entitled to good parenting. What we are entitled to is good boundaries and healthy love. And I think about that, right? Like, when we have worked so hard to find, value and worth and acceptance of ourselves, then we tolerate a lot less. We are less inclined to take, scraps or nothing from other people. It does take effort and time because a lot of times those old patterns of our value and worth is tied up in how someone else sees me and how someone else engages with me. For some of us, that's hardwired, and it takes years to unlearn those things, right? It takes years to figure out, oh, I don't have to give more. If you don't have it to give, then I'll just stop giving, right? But it's also an opportunity to recognize when we are going back into our default setting, right? I talk about our default setting, and there's a couple podcasts about it, but it's that experience that is hardwired into us. Either from birth or lots and lots of experience. And so it's that well-worn neural pathway of this is how we do things. And so when we think about the road goes both ways, or the phone goes both ways, communication goes both ways, yes, and effort goes both ways, right? I think about the idea of what people feel entitled to. There's an SNL skit with, what's her name? Anyway, a funny actress who was talking about coming home from college, and Cameron Diaz, and how like they're entitled to all the snacks in their refrigerator and their parents to do laundry and all of these things. And I find it interesting, right? I find it interesting that obviously it's a skit on SNL. It's supposed to be funny. But there is this level of perceived entitlement that adult children feel entitled to their parents' resources. So when I talk about resources, I don't mean money, but I do mean time, space, mental energy, emotionality, like all of the things that we have to set boundaries around. And if we don't communicate them, there is this level of entitlement that our adult children, and we play into it 100%. If I know that Luna's coming over, I may or may not get her favorite snacks. Now, that said, that's my choice, and I also like those snacks. But it is something that I do. She's not entitled to them. That's something I participate in. But I also recognize that, like, when I go to her house, she may not do that same thing, which is fine. She has lots of other snacks, and a Costco membership. But I'm not entitled to her space. I'm not entitled to her time. I'm not entitled to her anything. And there's a lot of adult parents of adult children, who feel as though they are entitled to their grandchildren. They're entitled to their child's house. They're entitled to their child's time. They're entitled to make parenting suggestions or make commentary on how their child and or their partner lives. That's bullshit. And we are not entitled to those things, right? That said, if an adult child lives in our home where we pay the mortgage, there should be an expectation of, common spaces or rent or, contribution to the community. But there is no free ride, and it is our responsibility to communicate what those expectations are. Now, when this creator was talking, I did, like I said, look at some of her content, and she was really frustrated because I can imagine, just based on the very few videos that I watched, that she's a new mother and she wanted her kids to have a grandparent experience that her parent is unwilling to give. And that's really hard. I understand that. But again, we're not entitled to grandparents. We're not entitled to having an experience just because we brought people onto the planet. That's not how that works. And, I think it's interesting. You all know that I have very little interest in grandmother activity. I picked my grandma name years ago. It's Rocket because rockets go to space. They do not hang out with children. But I have never wanted that, right? The same is true with my experience with Margarita, is that if she wanted to be a grandmother, that's an effort she had to put in. And fortunately, she has a great relationship with my daughter, an effort that they both put into that relationship. But I was not entitled to having a great grandmother experience. And to be fair, she is a wonderful grandmother. Very different than she was as a parent, for better or worse. That's just true. And someday, if that's going to be a privilege that I earn, that I hope to have a boundaried, very strict and strategic relationship with Luna's children, should she choose to have them. And I don't have a sense of entitlement. There's so many funny videos on Instagram of like moms carrying their grandchildren out in bags and or suitcases. Why would you do that? I get it. Babies are cute to some people. But there is nothing about sleeplessness and all of the things that come with raising small children that I want to participate in. Literally nothing. I want Luna to have that experience, Luna and her partner. I don't want that. But I do recognize that some people feel as though things will magically change when, and it's funny because like lots of adults tell me that all the time. You'll change your mind when my baby comes. No, I won't. I won't. I have contributed to the raising of lots of humans. I love my nieces and nephews. I don't want anything to do with babies. Like that's just not my thing. And when clients are really holding on to the idea that they don't get enough time with their grandchildren, or some of them are like, well, I'll just never see that baby because, so-and-so is in charge of them. And so they stop making efforts. And it's really interesting to me because, again, just because it doesn't work out the way you want it to, does that mean that you stop putting in effort? And that's where the effort goes both ways. That is the only thing that goes both ways. Well, roads go both ways, and, communication goes both ways, and effort goes both ways. But it is interesting to me when people feel as though because they are titled, so mom, grandmother, granddad, dad, they feel entitled to certain treatment or certain access to other humans. That's not how that works, right? And I love that millennials are getting better, and certainly Gen Y and Gen Z are wonderful at using therapy speak in their posts and online and as they speak to one another. It is a little frustrating when they don't use it right, but it comes with effort and energy. What I do love is that certainly these younger generations, because I sound like an old lady, but it's fine. These younger generations have access to therapy and mental health in a way that we didn't as Gen Xers and certainly people before. When I have a boomer come into my office, someone who is older than 65, and they've never been to therapy, right? Or they maybe had gone to therapy once because they had a very specific issue. And so when they come to my office now, they are coming with a desire to understand things. And they want to do the work, right? 'Cause that's what I love about a boomer is they will do the work. But they have to choose to, right? They have to put in that effort. They have to learn the skill and then use the skill. I say that often, and I said it in the podcast follow through, because there's lots of people out here who are, hoarding tools and never using them. Which, that's fine. I will recognize when a client is hoarding tools and then not doing the work. And then we have a conversation, and then if they choose not to participate anymore, then that's okay. But I do recognize that that is part of what people do sometimes, is that they will come to therapy. They want to be seen. They want to feel heard. They want to recognize that another person acknowledges their struggle or whatever. And then they leave. And if you don't apply the tool, it reminds me of, there's a scene in Practical Magic where the Sandra Bullock character has a store where she makes like lotions and potions and soaps and all kinds of things. And this man comes in and he's like, it's not working. And she's like, did you put it in the right place? And he kind of looks around and she makes an eye gesture to where it's supposed to be placed. And it's interesting, right? The same is true with the tools you learn in therapy, right? If you don't say the words, if you don't acknowledge the feelings, if you don't do the work, then nothing changes if nothing changes. It continues to stay the same if you continue to be on the hamster wheel, right? There's lots of people who are out there touting that they have neurodivergence. Either they are on the spectrum or they have ADHD or whatever. Just because you get a title, right, a label of what is going on with your brain, that does not absolve you of having to learn skills to figure it out. That is the effort, right? It's interesting because I work with partners who come into therapy and they're like, well, they've got this and this diagnosis, but they are unwilling to set the timer or follow through or create a system to make it better. And I'm like, okay, well, lots of people have diagnoses, and that is not helpful if you're not going to do the work, right? If you're not going to put in the effort to make the changes, because I've got lots of clients who have diagnoses and they do fine. They do great, actually. They are able to use the tools and skills that they have been given, either by me or someone else, to be good at life, right? There's lots of people who are neurodivergent and also good at life. And the one thing that separates the ones who are doing well and the ones who are not is effort, right? The same is true for parents who maybe had a rocky relationship with their children, hand raised, at different times. I chose to do the work. I chose to shut my mouth and practice listening. I chose to acknowledge that sometimes I felt entitled. There is an episode I did a couple years ago about entitlement and parenting adult children. And I 100% own that I had a level of entitlement, which I feel kind of gross about now. But as our relationship has continued to evolve, grow, and change, part of it is we take space from one another. Part of it is we create opportunities to talk. We ask questions like, do you have the space right now for me to unpack? Or do you have the space just for me to vent? Or can you help me problem solve this? Or I need to understand with clear communication what your expectations are and what my expectations are. We use therapy speak often. Part of that is because I teach communication skills, and part of that is there's therapists out there that know my name. And I have no shame about that, right? Like, none of us comes out of the parenting sphere without creating some bumps and bruises, if not damage. And I'm really proud of my child who chooses to seek help, to work on herself and her stuff. It is actually unethical and inappropriate for me to be her therapist. I can only be her mother and sometimes be her friend. And that is my role, right? I try to stay in my lane when it comes to those things. And so when it comes to her relationships, when it comes to her friendships, and like I said, if someday she chooses to make people, I am going to be there should she ask me to contribute, but I will not go running around telling her what my opinion is and what I think, because it's none of my damn business, right? I am not entitled to anything, but I do have the opportunity to contribute should she ask. So that's where the podcast came from today. I'm very curious to hear your perspective. I will, maybe make some polls on my Instagram story if you guys want to answer those or think about where, this idea of effort goes both ways, right? The road goes both ways. The phone goes both ways. I mean, the cool thing is, and I talk about it often as it relates to parent-child relationships with adults, is that this thing right here, I'm holding my phone up, I can turn it off. I can decline a call. I can mute a feed. There's so many options, right? If you find that getting a phone call or getting a text message from specific people with titles creates a lot of anxiety or frustration or builds up, contributes to the resentment that you're holding on to, it would be helpful for you first to identify what that is and then start to recognize what your expectations are. You may need to shift them, right? As I've spoken about many times, and certainly in The Myth of Family, both the chapter in the book, Best Intentions, the Things They Do for Love, and I think there's a blog post. I think there's also an episode called The Myth of Family. Just because someone has a title does not mean they are entitled to anything. And once you start to see them as human beings, you can actually take the title away. Now, you can't remove the title, but you can recognize if they are not doing the job, then they just go by their first name. It's funny because in the book, I think it was Susan and Tomas. And people were like, is that actually your parents' names? No. They were just the first names that I thought about. But yeah, if you want to refer to your parent as their first name, either directly to them or, when you're talking about them, what it does is it takes away that expectation. It takes away the expectation that they are supposed to be something that maybe they're not capable of. And that's really helpful when you start to recognize that you can empower yourself by taking away the expectation of that title. And when you start to recognize that your needs are maybe getting met, and certainly your parenting needs from people other than, your biological family, when you have people in your life that are willing to nurture you and see you and communicate with you and support you, they may not have titles, but they're doing the job of maybe somebody who had a title and lost it, right? So, okay, for real, that's your nugget. I'm going to post this next weekend. I will be in El Paso, so I'm not sure if you're going to get a podcast. You might, on Thursday, which is what we've been doing lately. But I hope you had a great holiday. I hope you're having a great long weekend. Shop local and small stores. And recognize that, you can appreciate people all year round. And you can give gifts all year round. You guys know that I'm not a holiday person for lots of reasons, not least of which that I don't like to participate in the kind of big commercial blah, blah, blah. It's stressful for people. So make sure to be aware of your capacity. Make sure to recognize what your yes budget is. And if you change your mind somewhere in the middle and you don't want to participate anymore, you are totally well within your right to walk away and stop participating. So there's your nugget. I will talk to you soon. Take care.